Hey, welcome to a new video. The presence of Africans in what is now the United States began earlier than many people think. Most refer to the year of 1619 as the starting point, when Africans arrived in the English colony of Virginia. But nearly a century earlier, in 1526, a significant event had already taken place. A Spanish expedition led by Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón attempted to establish a settlement along the southeastern coast of present-day America, likely in what is now Georgia or South Carolina. Around 100 Africans were brought along against their will as part of their colonial mission. The settlement faced many challenges, including disease, food shortages, and tensions with local indigenous communities. The project collapsed within a short time, and many of the Africans eventually sought refuge among those indigenous groups. It wasn't until 1619 that a more structured system of slavery began in the English-speaking part of North America. That year, the ship White Lion arrived at Point Comfort, now Hampton, Virginia, carrying 20 to 30 Africans, who were exchanged for supplies. This moment is often seen as a beginning of a system that would have a profound impact on the country's history.
Are you new to this channel? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And before we start, also like the video.
The Middle Passage refers to the harrowing transatlantic voyage endured by millions of Americans as part of their transatlantic slave trade. This journey formed the middle leg of the so-called triangular trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, spanning from the 16th to 19th century. The crossing typically lasted between 6 weeks and 3 months, and conditions on board were horrific. People were crammed into tight spaces, with little access to food, fresh air, or hygiene. The long journey and lack of care made passage physically and mentally devastating. Disease was rampant, and many lost hope. It's estimated that millions of Africans made this journey, with a significant portion not surviving the trip. The Middle Passage has become a powerful symbol of the immense human suffering caused by the slave trade and a reminder of its far-reaching effects on world history. The Zong massacres are one of the most infamous and horrifying incidents of the transatlantic slave trade. In November 1781, the British slave ship Zong became embroiled in scandal after its crew made a drastic and tragic decision during a prolonged voyage from Africa to the Caribbean. Due to navigational errors and dwindling supplies, the journey took much longer than expected. Fearing financial losses, those in charge made a grim choice in hopes of claiming insurance money. Over 130 enslaved Africans were thrown overboard. The ship's owners later sought compensation for their insurers, sparking a court case in England in 1783. The trial laid bare the cold reality that enslaved people were legally treated as property, not human beings. Public outrage over the case gave a powerful boost to the growing abolitionist movement in Britain. Prince Abdul Raman was born in 1762 in what is now New Guinea. As the son of a local ruler, he received an excellent Islamic and military education and was raised in a powerful royal household. During a military campaign in 1788, he was captured by a rival group and eventually sold to European traders. He was transported to America and ended up enslaved on a plantation in Natchez, Mississippi, under the ownership of Thomas Foster. Despite his status, he lived in bondage for 40 years, earning the nickname the Prince due to his noble heritage. He married a woman named Isabella and had children. His unique background eventually caught the attention of journalists, abolitionists, and even President John Quincy Adams. In 1828, he was freed on the condition that he leaves the country. Together with his wife, he traveled to Liberia, hoping to reconnect with his roots. Tragically, he died 6 months after arriving, never having returned to his homeland. The Haitian Revolution was one of the most dramatic and inspiring events of the 18th century. Between 1791 and 1804, the people of the French colony of Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, rose up against the colonial system. It's recognized as the most successful slave revolt in world history. Harsh conditions on the sugar plantations sparked a massive uprising in August 1791, as large swaths of the island joined the fight for freedom and equality. Foreign powers like Britain and Spain also got involved, each pursuing their own interests. To retain the support of the rebels, France abolished slavery in 1794. A key figure in the revolution was Toussaint Louverture, a formerly enslaved man who became a brilliant military and political leader. In 1802, Napoleon sent troops to retake the island, but they were eventually defeated by Haitian forces under Jean-Jacques Dessalines. On January 1, 1804, Haiti declared independence, becoming the first black republic in the world and the first nation to fully abolish slavery. Paseka is a well-known historical figure from Brazil's slavery era in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. His life story offers a disturbing glimpse into the social and moral abuse of the time. When vast numbers of people were stripped of their freedom and dignity, his life story offers a disturbing glimpse into the social and moral abuse of that time. When vast numbers of people were stripped of their freedom and dignity. Of African descent and likely born in Angola, Paseka was brought to Brazil and became known for his striking appearance and physical strength. He was forced to serve as a breeder, tasked with fathering children with enslaved women to increase a slave owner's labor force. His nickname, Paseka, which translates to dryfoot, may refer to his gait or appearance, though its exact origin is unclear. Oral tradition suggests he fathered over 200 children. In places like Santa Eudosha, he's remembered as an ancestor of many. Although much of what is known about him comes from oral history, his story remains a powerful symbol of the dehumanization of slavery. His descendants continue to honor his memory as a tribute and a call to reflect on the past. Maroon communities were settlements by people who had escaped from slavery. Fleeing from plantations, they established themselves in hard-to-reach areas, such as dense forests, mountains, and swamps, where they could reclaim and protect their freedom. The word maroon comes from the Spanish Maroon, meaning escaped or wild, and has variations in multiple languages. These communities were often self-sufficient, relying on farming, fishing, hunting, and trade. They didn't only include formerly enslaved individuals, but also indigenous people and free persons, resulting in a rich cultural blend. Many of these societies developed their own systems of governance, often inspired by African traditions, and played a vital role in preserving cultural identity. Maroon communities didn't simply isolate themselves, they actively resisted colonial oppression. In some cases, they negotiated treaties with colonial powers. For example, in 18th century Jamaica, several agreements were made that granted Maroons land and autonomy in exchange for peaceful coexistence. The White House in Washington, D.C., the symbol of the American presidency, was built with the labor of people who were denied their freedom. In 1795, enslaved African Americans were used for the physically demanding work required during its construction. Although the federal government did not own slaves itself, it rented laborers from slaveholders, with wages going directly to the owners, not the workers. These individuals were involved in tasks like quarrying and preparing stone, as well as transporting materials and general construction. More specialized masonry work was typically handled by European artisans, such as Scottish stonemasons. Known names of some enslaved workers include Peter, Ben, Daniel, and Harry, who labored under the supervision of architect James Hoban. In total, over 200 enslaved people contributed to the construction of both the White House and the U.S. Capitol. Today, their contributions are recognized in historical research and commemorated in exhibitions, including those by the White House Historical Association. The story of Igbo Landing, also known as Igbo Landing, is a remarkable example of courage and resistance to slavery. In May 1803, a group of about 75 Igbo people from present-day Nigeria arrived at Dunbar Creek on St. Simon's Island, Georgia. Sold to plantation owners, they were being transported by boat to their destination. During the journey, the Igbo rose up, then took control of the vessel and grounded it in shallow waters. Rather than submit to a life of enslavement, they made a collective decision that has since become a powerful symbol of self-determination. According to oral tradition, they walked into the water singing, with some believing they spiritually returned to Africa. The story evolved into legend, the myth of the flying Africans, which lives on in African diaspora folklore in southern U.S. history. In the southern United States, before the Civil War, there were organized groups known as slave patrols. Their role was to monitor enslaved people and capture those who left plantations without permission. These patrols were established to maintain control and prevent unrest or rebellion. The first patrols began in the early 18th century in the Carolinas, often in response to fears about escape and the need to protect the plantation economy. Patrols were typically composed of white men who either volunteered or were required to participate. Authorized by local authorities, they had the power to question, detain, and return enslaved individuals to their owners. While these patrols were a direct part of the slavery system, they are now viewed as early precursors to policing in the American South. Their history remains a sensitive but crucial topic in the broader narrative of law enforcement in the U.S. The kangu was a traditional form of punishment and public humiliation, used for a long time in China and other parts of East Asia, such as Korea and Vietnam. The origin of this practice dates back to the Tang Dynasty and remained in use for centuries. The kangu consisted of a large, heavy wooden board with an opening in the center for the person's neck. Unlike the European pillory, the kangu was sometimes portable, limiting the movement of the person wearing it. This form of punishment was meant to make the offender publicly visible and serve as an example. Often, the nature of the offense was written on the wooden board so that passerbys could see why the person was being punished. The kangu was usually used for lighter offenses like theft, fraud, or disturbing the peace. Sometimes people who couldn't repay debts or were accused of disrespecting authority were subjected to this punishment. In some cases, individuals with a kangu were placed in a central location, such as a market or village square, for the purpose of deterrence and maintaining social order. Family members or sympathizers could bring food and drink, though this is often dependent on the situation and local customs. While this practice is no longer in use today, the kangu remains a striking example of how societies in the past dealt with order and authority. In August 1831, one of the most well-known uprisings against slavery took place in Southampton County, Virginia. The leader was Nat Turner, an enslaved man known for being a preacher. He believed he had received visions calling him to rise up against the system of slavery. The rebellion began on August 21st, when Turner and a small group of followers launched an attack on the plantation where he lived. They moved through the county, recruiting others as they went. Within 2 days, their group had grown to around 75 people. The rebellion caused widespread fear and was seen as a direct threat to the existing social order. Eventually, local militias crushed the revolt. Turner went into hiding, but was captured weeks later and eventually executed. The uprising had major consequences. Southern states responded by enacting even harsher laws. Education, gatherings, and movement for both enslaved and free black people were severely restricted. Still, Nat Turner's rebellion remains a powerful symbol of resistance and is considered a pivotal moment in American history. In the annals of maritime history, the practice of keelhauling stands out as a notorious form of punishment used to maintain discipline aboard ships during the 17th and 18th centuries. The mechanism of keelhauling involves suspending the victim from a rope from the ship's mast, with weights attached to their legs. Upon releasing the rope by the crew, the unfortunate person would plunge into the sea and be dragged along the keel, or bottom of the ship, hence the name keelhauling. This part of the ship, often covered with sharp barnacles, caused severe injuries to the victim, exacerbating the suffering. Evidence suggests that the Dutch Navy applied this punishment during this period. Accounts from British sources suggest that while the punishment caused immense pain, the primary goal was not death. Victims reportedly received intervals to recover from the ordeal, albeit often deprived of the sensation of pain during the process. By the beginning of the 18th century, the British had ceased the use of keelhauling as an official punishment around 1720, considering it extremely cruel. The Dutch followed suit and officially banned keelhauling as a method by 1750. Ellen and William Craft were a married couple from Macon, Georgia, who became famous for one of their boldest escapes from slavery ever recorded. Ellen was born in 1826 to an enslaved woman and her white enslaver, giving her a very light complexion. William, born in 1824, was a skilled cabinet maker and also enslaved. In December 1848, they devised a brilliant plan. Ellen would disguise herself as a sickly young white man traveling with his servant. She wore men's clothing, a top hat, and bandages over her face and arms, supposedly for medical reasons, allowing her to avoid speaking or signing anything. William played the role of her enslaved attendant. Traveling by train and boat, they made their way to Philadelphia. The disguise worked so well that Ellen was even warned about potential abolitionists who might try to help her servant escape. On Christmas Day, 1848, they reached freedom. The couple, later settled in Boston, became active in the abolitionist movement and documented their journey in the book Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom. Tarring and feathering was recorded as early as the 12th century. For example, during the Third Crusade, Richard the Lionheart issued a decree that sailors caught stealing could be punished with tar and feathers. This form of public humiliation was practiced from the medieval period to the 19th century in both Europe and North America. It involved smearing someone with hot tar and then covering them with feathers, giving them a striking and shameful appearance. The punishment was often carried out not by official legal authorities, but by citizens who felt the need to respond quickly and visibly to certain behaviors. The person was sometimes partially stripped, after which warm, but not boiling, tar, usually made from natural resin or coal tar, was applied. Feathers were then sprinkled over the tar, sticking to the body. The person was often paraded through the streets, sometimes tied to a cart or a rail, so that onlookers could see. The goal was to send a clear social message and discourage others from engaging in similar behavior. The punishment was also often used as a form of protest, especially when people didn't trust the legal system and wanted to send a powerful signal to authorities or opponents. In the 18th and 19th centuries in the United States, a disturbing practice emerged in which enslaved people were intentionally used to increase the labor force. This approach became more important after the transatlantic slave trade was banned in 1808. Slaveholders saw reproduction among the enslaved population as a way to maintain their workforce without buying more people. Women in particular were pressured, often from a young age, to bear multiple children by their 20s. This was especially common in states like Virginia and Maryland, where many enslaved people were then sold to the Deep South. However, many women resisted in their own quiet ways. Some used herbal remedies to prevent pregnancy, delayed relationships, or found other methods to reclaim bodily autonomy. These acts of resistance were subtle but powerful rejections of a system that gave them little control over their lives. Even to this day, the breaking wheel remains one of the most gruesome execution methods in history. This was primarily reserved for the most serious criminals and intended to inflict unbearable pain and suffering, often attended by large crowds. Victims of this punishment faced two terrifying possibilities: being broken by the wheel or being broken on the wheel. After the ordeal, victims were often left on the wheel for hours or even days, their broken limbs entangled in the spokes, undergoing a slow and agonizing death. Originating from the Roman Empire, it was originally used as a means to inflict pain. Victims, usually slaves or Christians, would be strapped to a bench, and an iron-rimmed wheel would be slammed into their body, starting at their ankles and moving upward. The Romans employed various techniques with the wheel, including vertically hanging victims, binding them to the wheel, or igniting fires beneath it for added torture. Henry Box Brown, born around 1815 in Louisa County, Virginia, became legendary for one of the most unusual escapes from slavery. At age 15, he was sent to work in a tobacco factory in Richmond. When his wife and children were sold and sent away in 1848, he resolved to escape. With the help of allies, he came up with a daring plan. On March 23, 1849, Brown had himself sealed in a wooden crate marked dry goods and shipped from Richmond to Philadelphia, home of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. The journey took 26 hours by train, wagon, and boat. Inside the small box, Brown had limited air and space, and used his hat to cover a breathing hole whenever the box was handled. When the crate was finally opened in Philadelphia, Brown quite literally stepped into freedom. He later became a well-known speaker and performer, using his incredible story to draw attention to the horrors of slavery and support the abolitionist cause. Flagellation is a historical form of corporal punishment in which someone was beaten with a whip, rod, or similar instrument, usually on the back, legs, or buttocks. This practice was applied through the centuries to enforce discipline, impose punishment, or emphasize authority. Common instruments included rope, whips, and rods. Those who underwent this punishment were often restrained to limit their movement, and the number of lashes were usually predetermined. The punishment sometimes took place in closed institutions, like barracks or prisons, but also in public to create a deterrent effect. Within the military, on ships, and even at schools, it was long seen as a way to maintain order and obedience. People found guilty of offenses like theft or disobedience could be punished in this manner. The practice was widespread in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, where it was part of a social and legal structure. In the Roman Empire, it was applied within the military and for punishing slaves. As time passed, societies increasingly viewed it as too harsh or inappropriate, leading to it being abolished in many countries by the end of the 19th century. J. Marion Sims, often referred to as the father of modern gynecology, is now a highly controversial figure, due to the methods he used to develop his medical techniques. In the 1840s in Montgomery, Alabama, Sims conducted gynecological surgeries on enslaved black women. His goal was to find treatments for complications that could occur after childbirth. Between 1845 and 1849, Sims experimented on at least 7 women, including Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. These women endured multiple surgeries under conditions that are now considered ethically indefensible. At the time, Sims wrongly believed that African-descended people felt less pain, an idea that influenced how he treated his patients. The surgeries were performed in a makeshift clinic, and Anarcha reportedly underwent more than 30 procedures. While Sims' work led to medical advances, the knowledge was gained through deeply exploitative means. In 2018, his statue in Central Park, New York was removed following public outcry and calls to acknowledge the suffering behind his legacy. Loosely translated from Latin as punishment of the sack, Poena cullei was a punishment specifically reserved for the act of killing one's own parent. According to a prominent Roman jurist from the 3rd century AD, the punishment involved the guilty party being beaten and then sewn into a sack. Inside the sack, along with the condemned person, would be a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. after which the sack would be thrown into the depths of the sea if it was nearby. If the sea was not readily accessible, the sack would be thrown to wild animals, as prescribed by the constitution of the divine Hadronius. The fate of the condemned person sealed inside the sack was inevitably grim, as they faced potential death by snakebite, the brute force of a chimpanzee, or suffocation from drowning. On September 18, 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was enacted in the United States as part of the Compromise of 1850. This law granted slaveholders the legal right to reclaim people who had escaped bondage, even if they were living in the states where slavery were officially outlawed. Once identified, escapees could be returned without a trial. Both local and federal authorities in all states were required to cooperate, giving slaveholders powerful legal tools across state lines. Anyone who aided fugitives or resisted arrest could face heavy fines or prison time. The accused had no right to a jury trial, increasing the risk of wrongful capture, even of free black citizens. The law also had economic effects. In border regions, the value of enslaved laborers rose due to the higher likelihood of their retrieval. The act triggered fierce opposition in the North, where many refused to comply and joined the growing abolitionist movement. Support surged for networks like the Underground Railroad, which helped guide people to safer territory. The boiling pot was a severe punishment applied between the 12th and 18th centuries in parts of Europe, especially in countries like England and France. This method was primarily used for serious crimes, such as treason, forgery, and in some cases, accusations of witchcraft. The punishment involved exposing a person to a cauldron of hot liquid material, such as water, oil, or resin. In some cases, the person would be immersed directly, while in others, the process was gradual. The high temperatures of the liquid, often above boiling point, caused extreme physical stress and exhaustion. The punishment was seen as a deterrent and aimed at discouraging others from committing similar crimes. Such punishments were mostly applied to individuals accused of betraying their country or ruler, crimes considered particularly grave. The making of counterfeit money could also lead to the punishment in some regions, as well as accusations of witchcraft in areas where witch hunts were actively taking place. Derived from the Greek word scaphe, meaning scooping or hollow, Scaphism is known as one of the most horrifying execution methods devised by humanity. While various civilizations have employed gruesome punishments, the Persian Empire around 500 BC introduced Scaphism, surpassing them all in sheer barbarity. This ancient form of torture involved victims being slowly and painfully consumed by insects. Their feet, head, and hands remained exposed to the elements while the rest of their body was enclosed within the boats. Left to endure the blazing sun for days on end, victims suffered under a relentless onslaught of insect bites and vermin. Trapped within their floating chamber of death, they faced a chilling fate of unbearable pain and eventual death from exposure and infection caused by countless bites. To exacerbate their torment, victims were forced to ingest copious amounts of milk and honey before being placed between the boats. Additionally, the honey was smeared on their bodies to attract more insects and vermin, ensuring a merciless assault on their flesh. While the bites were painful, victims typically succumbed to exposure and infection rather than just the insect bites. Often lasting for multiple days, this torture saw victims brought back to shore each day, only to be doused with more honey and sent back out to sea. Myrtle's plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, is infamous as one of the most haunted and mysterious sites in the United States. Built in 1796 by General David Bradford and originally named Laurel Grove, the plantation has inspired countless stories of strange occurrences, tragic deaths, and ghostly apparitions. Some believe it was built on an ancient Tunica tribal burial ground. Legends say as many as 12 spirits roam the property, linked to various misfortunes. The most famous is Chloe, a young enslaved woman who worked the main house. According to folklore, Chloe had a special status in the household of Clark Woodruff, the plantation owner. Fearing she might lose her position, she began eavesdropping on the family and was caught. As punishment, her ear was cut off, and she wore a green turban to cover the wound. In one version of the story, Chloe baked a cake with oleander leaves to make the family ill, hoping to nurse them back to health and regain trust. But the plan went tragically wrong. What happened next varies, but many claim Chloe's spirit still wanders the grounds. In 1992, a photo allegedly captured her shadowy figure between two buildings, fueling belief in the ghost's continued presence. Peine forte dure was a historical form of punishment applied mainly in medieval and early modern England. The term literally means strong and hard punishment in French, and was used for people who refused to plead guilty or innocent during a trial. This refusal was seen as a form of resistance by the courts, and the punishment aimed to force a plea. The person would be laid on the ground, and then a wooden or iron plate would be placed on their body. Gradually, heavy objects would be added to the plate, creating increasing physical pressure. This method caused much discomfort, especially due to the weight on the chest, making breathing difficult and placing the body under severe strain. The idea behind this approach was not necessarily to punish immediately, but to elicit a response. The court wanted the person to make a declaration. If they continued to refuse, the pressure could be increased, sometimes leading to exhaustion or even collapse. Although this practice is now unimaginable, it shows how justice and cooperation in legal matters were handled in the past. It's also a powerful historical example of how the refusal to cooperate in legal proceedings were perceived at the time. Crucifixion is a historical execution method in which a person is suspended from a wooden cross. It was a form of punishment used by various ancient civilizations, including Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, and Romans. Crucifixion was considered one of the most cruel and humiliating ways to die in antiquity. The process of crucifixion typically involved nailing or tying the hands and feet of the victim to a wooden cross. The crucified person was then hung on the cross until they died, often as a result of a combination of factors such as suffocation, shock, or heart failure. The duration of crucifixion could vary, with death sometimes taking hours or even days to occur. Jesus Christ is one individual who underwent crucifixion, which was a significant event in Christian theology and described in the New Testament of the Bible. According to the Gospels, Jesus was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death by crucifixion by Roman authorities. He was forced to carry his cross to the place of execution, known as Golgotha, where he was crucified alongside two criminals. Elizabeth Freeman, also known as Mum Bet, played a pivotal role in the legal fight against slavery in the U.S. Born around 1744, she was enslaved in the household of John Ashley, a powerful man in Sheffield, Massachusetts. In September 1881, she decided to peacefully demand her freedom through the legal system. Freeman based her case on the new 1780 Massachusetts Constitution, which declared that all men are born free and equal. With the help of lawyers and abolitionist Theodore Sagwick, she argued that slavery violated these constitutional rights. Though she couldn't read or write, her determination convinced the court. She won the case and was declared free, setting a legal precedent that helped pave the way toward the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts. After her victory, she chose the name Elizabeth Freeman. She refused an offer to return to her former owner and instead became a paid housekeeper for the Sagwick family. Freeman was admired for her wisdom and served her community as a healer, midwife, and caregiver. The strappado was a historical method of interrogation and punishment used in medieval and early modern Europe, particularly between the Middle Ages and the 17th century. This technique was often employed during witch trials and criminal investigations to apply pressure on suspects. The method began by binding the person's hands, usually behind their back, and then suspending them by a rope attached to the wrists, usually a pulley or similar system. The person would be slowly lifted, causing strain on the body. Sometimes, the feet would just touch the ground, but in many cases, the person would hang completely in the air, leading to significant physical strain, especially in the arms and shoulders. An additional step in this method was to suddenly drop the person, creating a shock throughout the body. This process could be repeated, with the person being lifted and lowered several times. The repeated movements caused increasing physical exhaustion, even when the lifting stopped. The person was sometimes left in this position for long periods, leading to muscle and joint strain. Although this practice is no longer in use today, it illustrates how physical methods were used in the past to enforce obedience. Vlad the Impaler, also known as Vlad Dracula, was a historical figure who ruled over Wallachia, a region in present-day Romania, in the 15th century. He's famous for his cruel and sadistic methods of punishment, with his favorite execution method being impalement. Vlad the Impaler earned his nickname due to his penchant for impaling his enemies on long, sharp stakes. This execution method involved driving a stake through the victim's body and then hoisting it vertically to display the victim's suffering. It could take hours or even days for the impaled person to die, causing immense pain. Vlad's use of impalement was not limited to foreign enemies, but also extended to domestic adversaries, and even his own people. He saw it as a means to instill fear, maintain control, and deter potential threats. For example, Vlad left behind a field filled with thousands of impaled victims as a deterrent to the advancing Ottoman troops. Vlad the Impaler's reputation as a bloodthirsty ruler has had a lasting impact on popular culture. Bram Stoker's novel Dracula drew inspiration from Vlad's brutal reputation, although Stoker's fictional character differs significantly from the historical figure. The weeping time marks one of the most heartbreaking events in American slavery's history. On March 2nd and 3rd, 1859, in Savannah, Georgia, the largest recorded auction of enslaved people in the U.S. took place. Plantation owner Pierce Meese Butler, facing financial troubles, sold a large portion of his labor force, a total of 436 individuals, of men, women, and children. They were auctioned off. Many had spent their entire lives together on Butler's plantations. Though promises were made to keep families intact, this often wasn't honored. Only married couples were sometimes sold together, while other family ties were frequently broken. Constant rain and the emotional toll on all involved made a lasting impression. The sorrow of the movement, mingled with the downpour, gave the event its haunting name, the Weeping Time. Immurement was a historical form of punishment where a person was locked in a small, enclosed space, often without access to the outside world. This method was used in various societies, particularly in the Antiquity and the Middle Ages, and was known for its severe physical and mental strain. The space could be a room, cell, or even a space within a wall where the person could not move or escape. Often, the individual was tightly secured or bound to restrict movement, without communication or contact with others. This form of isolation placed a great mental pressure on the person. In some cases, the space had little or no ventilation, making the confinement even harder. The isolation and lack of daylight could have a profound psychological effect over time, leading to feelings of confusion and disorientation. People subjected to this punishment often spent days or longer in complete isolation. While this is no longer practiced today, it's often referenced in history as an example of how punishment and social control were handled in the past. It also raises questions about the boundaries of justice and the role of humanity in historical legal systems. Of all these methods, this is the one everyone would do anything to avoid: flaying. Flaying is a historical practice where the skin of a person is removed from their body. It's been used as a form of punishment, torture, or execution in various cultures throughout history. Flaying a person typically involves the use of sharp objects, such as knives or swords. This process is incredibly painful and often leads to severe injury and ultimately death. Flaying was sometimes performed on living individuals, while in other cases, it was carried out post-mortem, as a means of further humiliation or as a warning to others. This punishment is also documented in various historical contexts. For example, in ancient Assyria, flaying was used as a method for prisoners of war or individuals who had committed serious crimes. The Aztecs of Mesoamerica also practiced flaying as a ritual act, often associated with human sacrifice. The Clotilda was the last known ship to bring enslaved Africans to the U.S. More than 50 years after the transatlantic slave trade was officially outlawed, in 1860, Captain William Foster carried out the voyage, funded by Alabama businessman Timothy Mayer, who aimed to prove he could bypass the law. Departing from Mobile, Alabama, Foster sailed to Uda, in present-day Benin, where he took 125 people aboard. Ultimately, 110 people survived the journey and were smuggled into Alabama to conceal the illegal voyage. The ship was sunk in the Mobile River upon arrival. After the Civil War, the surviving captives were emancipated. Many stayed near Mobile, forming their own community, Africa Town. This settlement became a resilient, culturally rich place with deep historical roots. In 2019, the wreck of Clotilda was discovered, remarkably well preserved, offering a tangible link to the final chapter of the transatlantic slave trade. What's your perspective on this chapter of history? Let me know in the comments. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos we've made, click one on the screen or take a look at the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.